All right, we are back here on the podcast, getting ready to talk a little Mets offseason here. And since this worked out so well last year for the Mets, our conversation where they ended up parlaying our conversation to an 89 win NLCS appearance. I figure we'll try it again. We'll do the Met offseason think tank. The great friend of the podcast, Martino Puccio, is here. Martino, how are you?
Good, Mike. Good. Complete opposite vibe heading into this offseason as opposed to last year. Still a lot of angst, but it's still exciting times to have high expectations. I think this is probably the highest expectations or level of excitement I've had since heading into, I guess it's technically the 2004 offseason, heading into 2005, right?
Yep.
So 20 years.
Yeah. And it's funny, at this time last year, we were talking about Yoshiro Yamamoto is coming here, and he did not, but they still made out okay.
Yeah, they still made out okay. Yamamoto's saga, I think we kind of knew at the end of the day, like, hey, if the offers are similar with what the Dodgers were doing and Yamamoto's hype coming over to America is far greater than most players, I think, ever, realistically. So we got that record deal. Obviously, the Dodgers matched at that point. It made sense for the Mets not to go beyond that number because guess what? He never pitched in Major League Baseball, so it made a lot of sense for that.
Yeah, it is here. And as on top of the show, I mentioned, the Yankees not that much of anything. It seems that their whole thing is wait for Juan Soto, and if he doesn't stay, we'll go to Plan B at that point. The Mets are already starting to do their debt moves. They traded for Jose Siri a few weeks ago. They signed Frankie Montas earlier this week. Like, we know what they've done so far.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you knew with all the rotation arms that were leaving the Mets that they had to make some moves on whether it's the trade market, which we'll talk about, or just going after free agents that don't have qualifying offers attached to their deals. You knew somebody was going to be joining them. Obviously, Montas has met with a lot of vitriol, I guess, and negativity, eerily similar to some of the players that they signed last year. 17 million per year again. You're assuming the opt-in will happen if he has a so-so year. Um, which is kind of funny because Luis Severino, some people thought like there was a chance that he would accept the qualifying offer this year. Obviously, he goes back to hit the free agent market. Montas, his numbers were better after he joined the Brewers as opposed to the Cincinnati Reds. Great American Ballpark isn't the kindest to pitchers on top of the Reds, just not really developing or doing a great job with starting pitching in general. So even though they do have good pitchers, don't get me wrong, by the way, it's just not really a place where they do fantastic. Like the Mets have done, the Dodgers, obviously even the Brewers to an extent. So I think I understand this move. I'm not in love with it. I think it's okay. And I think a lot of the Mets fans that are freaking out about this are just not trusting in David Stearns, which is just very funny to me because I think he's earned that track record over the course of his career. It's not just with the Mets last year. I think a lot of people were like, oh, well, it was really just one year where he got a couple lucky ads. It's like, okay, no, it's not lucky when they're having career years and he's had that track record back in Milwaukee. This is a proven commodity. And I think a lot of Mets fans are just not knowing what to be able to do with that sort of information because we're so used to having terrible people in charge, and David Stearns is not that.
Yeah, he's not that. And obviously, the big matzo ball hanging over the entire offseason right now is still Juan Soto. And like the rumor mill's gotten out of control here, where we've heard all over Thanksgiving, oh, the Red Sox are close from random people on Twitter.
Hmm.
And Jared Carrabis picked it up. It's like, yeah, this is happening. We heard Andy Martino, he's basically nothing on SNY yesterday, going, oh, the owners involved seem to think Toronto's got the highest bid. And then we heard something say with the Yankees, like they feel very good about their role with him and they put their best foot forward here. To me, this says one thing. Nobody knows shit about what Juan Soto wants except for Juan Soto and Scott Boras. And to me, this still comes down to if Cohen wants him and the highest offer is from the Mets, he's coming to the Mets. That's the way I look at it.
I totally understand where you're coming from and looking at it. I agree. So we'll like circle back with like a couple of like big journalists and what they've been saying and all these sort of things. It's really funny when John Heyman goes on foul territory, and this isn't even a shot at Heyman, but when Heyman is saying things like, "Yeah, so there's five teams involved in the final bidding process," because he says he believes they're in the final round. So a couple of people have reported that it's sort of around the final round, heading into the winter meetings or to be done by the winter meetings. So that's not much of an update, right? And then he also proceeds to follow up by saying, yeah, there's five teams. okay, we know there's been five teams this entire time. So that's not necessarily an update. And Andy Martino's article started off by saying, no one knows anything, and then goes, well, some people think Toronto's there. We had people think Boston did a great job of putting their best foot forward. We heard the same about the Yankees, the Blue Jays. We haven't really heard too much about what the Dodgers and the Mets are sort of like. We've heard inklings that, personally, it's a good thing when a team isn't mentioned too much. I don't think you can take away that much from it. I do believe it'll be fairly obvious that the Mets will exceed an offer of $600 million. I think it's going to surpass, I think it's going to be the richest deal in MLB history. I think he's going to break Shohei Ohtani's 700 million number. I think he's that great of a hitter. I think that's what the Mets actually have to do at the end of the day. And a lot of the talk is kind of what Jack Curry was saying yesterday. The Yankees put their best foot forward. Yeah, sure. I'm sure every other team will be saying the same thing, right? They're not going to say, yeah, we messed up. We screwed up with this. We didn't put our best foot forward. No one's ever going to admit that. There's not a shot at Jack Curry's reporting. He's supposed to report any sort of news of what he's heard. He's very reliable. He's great. Not taking a shot at that. But the point is, they're not realistic updates. They're not real updates. We're not learning any new information. I think we kind of learned about where the Yankees kind of fall. We've heard they might not go past a certain number, but the beauty for the Yankees is that they might not have to, right? If they're similar, and I've maintained this, I know you and Will might disagree with me a little bit. I think if the Yankees are within a similar ballpark to the New York Mets, I think Soto would go back to the Yankees. I think the Mets have to substantially blow the Yankees out of the water. And I'm not talking about like $50 million in a total deal. And Jack Curry's talked about he and the Yankees are willing to kind of match that Ohtani number. And when they say that, they don't mean 700 million. What they mean is the annual cost of the player, meaning the salary is going to be around that range. I believe the Yankees would be willing to do that. Again, you also mentioned they still have to tiptoe around the line because they don't want to blow past that 310 million, I believe it is, right?
Yeah.
For that salary cap. So we all know if Soto and the Yankees get to that number where it's really high cost, they're going to have to dump Marcus Stroman as well. I'm sure they're going to be able to do that. They're obviously going to bring Glaber back, Anthony Rizzo back. But ultimately, and this is the final reference to some of these journalists, Heyman brings up this point on foul territory. He goes, "Yeah, so it's possible Soto would leave money on the table, but I also see him taking the highest offer. So that's also a nothing burger. You're saying he might leave some money, but he's also probably going to take the highest offer. That there's no decision there. You're kind of bouncing back and forth between two potential options. Again, the only way I see Soto taking less money is if it's a little different in terms of a deal where he can make up that money in the long run by playing for the premier franchise in Major League Baseball, which is the New York Yankees. However, I think our guy, Steve Cohen, needs to break the mold with this. He needs to do something where he surpasses $700 million. Or, like, say, if the Yankees don't go past like a 600 million base, regardless of the years, the Mets need to be a far superior offer to that. I'm talking like 80 million. People are like bringing up this $50 million number. I don't believe in that just because the years are going to be at least 10, right? We're thinking we know there's going to be opt-outs involved in this. You need to break it because as great as the Mets have kind of turned around their image in the last 18 months or so, they really need to put their best foot forward. Like the Mets have an intriguing project. I think there's a lot of promise to it, but is there that much guarantee that yet, Mike? I wouldn't say so. I think there's been a lot of good moments, but the Mets are still not getting rid of that, and what Steve Cohen had said, that negative perception of the Mets. It still lingers, and it's always going to linger until they win the World Series or sustain this great level of winning where they're making the playoffs every year, going to make deep runs into October, which is also great. Obviously, you want a championship, but at some point, you kind of have to have that level of consistency. I think the outlook is great. They could sell Soto on that, but ultimately, what you were saying, they have to offer the most money. And sometimes the most money isn't, oh my God, you blew everyone else out of the water money. The Mets need to blow everyone out of the water money with this because if it's close with all these other ball clubs, and again, I agree with what Jack Curry was saying. It's going to be a Subway Series for this. I don't see how Boston all of a sudden does this, and we're supposed to. And they make the signing for Oldest Chapman today, by the way. So they're not going in for Tanner Scott. They're not making a big splash. They pay him $10 million for, which is besides the point, right? Toronto, they haven't locked up Bichette. They haven't locked up Vlad Guerrero. So you're also sitting there like, what are they actually going to promise? The Yankees are the Yankees, right? The Mets have proven they're willing to spend money, offer a ton of money. And again, I know I'm rambling here a bit, but there's so much nuance to this. If the Mets are willing to offer and sign Frankie Montas for 17 million a year, Mike, you don't think they're going to go for a lot of money for a guy like Juan Soto, who everyone likes to call the Dominican Ted Williams? You don't think Steve Cohen and them are going to go to that offer number? It's just very funny to me how people are picking and choosing that they think Steve Cohen isn't this big bad wolf that is willing to offer a ton of money. He has. Every single time he has seen a player that he loves and is willing to sign and bring to the New York Mets, he offers record money. Francisco Lindor, shortstop record for money, for a contract. Again, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, highest AAV for a starting pitcher on the market, regardless of the age, or it was with the age at the time as well. So again, with Yamamoto, record offer on the money, the Dodgers happened to match it. Guess what? He was an incredible, I guess you could say, prospect or free agent at the time. So Cohen is there, and don't forget the Carlos Correa phone call when he was on vacation in Hawaii. He has been there. He has put the money up front just because he might not necessarily sign the guys, and there's reasoning behind that, right? You know this. Like you're trying to rebrand the Mets. You're trying to change the entire culture and perception of the New York Mets. You know how long that takes? You know how also long it took for Guggenheim to build up the Dodgers to where they at now? And they took them at a much better point than what Cohen took the Wilpon Mets from. So, like as dysfunctional as Frank McCourt and the Dodgers were at that time, it was a totally different brand and image to rebuild. The Dodgers just needed retooling. They were still a top four franchise at worst in Major League Baseball. The Mets and their perception has always been bottom five since their inception. It is really difficult to rebrand and fix that over a short period of time. And Cohen did this himself with that 3 to 5 year window comment. You need to show up. You need to eventually have that moment. And this is what I had hoped for. And you, I, and Will have talked about it for many years now. There has to be that foot that you put down that says to everybody, we're here and we're ready to compete as one of the top major league franchises for years to come. And sure, Lindor to an extent was that, but Soto is completely different. And I think it's a huge deal if the Mets do or don't get this guy. I really do. And I know not all Mets fans think it's a layup to get Soto, but it's fairly obvious that there's a lot of pressure on Steve Cohen from a subsection of the fan base that they need to sign Soto and they need to pay as much money as they can to get him in. And hopefully that's what we see, because to me, I don't think there's a number that is too large for this type of player. I think he's that great. And say the deal were to blow up in their faces, like so be it, that just happens. But you have to go and get this guy, because I think when we're talking about perception, Mike, and I'm sure you probably agree with this sort of signing changes that. It's the Beltran signing of this generation.
Yeah, I would say that for sure. I think you look at the context clues, how the Mets are operating. I know we heard that quote from David Stearns back in November about like, I want to be able to go in the free agent market every year, be able to add if I want to. And then we have the reports from Joel Sherman saying the Mets are staying within the top of the pitching market, which is the Corbin Burns, Max Fried like collection here. And they still are signing guys to short-term deals for pitching. Like it makes you feel like if they're not throwing the money at the aces, like they're throwing the money at Soto. It just sort of adds up here. It feels like off the 89 win year, you don't go small in the offseason.
I think it's just, this is why David Stearns is so great and you feel comfortable about things. It's not just because of what you said, and I think that's correct. It's also that the Mets have known and proven to themselves that they know how to get starting pitching. Brandon Sprout is in AAA as well. There's trade avenues that they can explore. We'll talk about those. You don't have to necessarily go for the Burns, the Max Frieds of the world. There's Walker Buehler's, there's Frankie Montas. Maybe they bring back Sean Manaea. And that also keeps you open for other options in terms of signing star hitters, because that's the formula, right? At the end of the day, that is the formula. We saw what the Dodgers just did. They also did it in 2020 as well. They didn't have the greatest of pitching staffs at the time, too, right? Like, regardless if it's a 60-game season, we're not sitting here saying, like, oh my God, those incredible Dodgers staffs. The best Dodgers staffs that you could argue with Zach Greinke and Clayton Kershaw and a couple other guys were in that 2015, 2018 range. And 2018 was a phenomenal team. They just, in 2017 as well, they just didn't get over the hump because the Astros and Red Sox were, in hindsight now, legendary teams. So it's been proven that you don't always need the greatest of pitching staffs. Lo and behold, the team that we root for, right? How many great pitching staffs have we had? Well, nothing. You need a load up on hitters. There's still good hitters out there on the market, one of which that played for this team at first base for over half a decade. So again, what the Mets need to do is put that money there. Walker Buehler, maybe it's a 2 to 3 year deal. We'll see what ends up happening. I still maintain that the Mets will be trading for a stud starting pitcher. That's just my estimation and how this free agent pitching market has been going, and the options that are out there potentially via trade.
All right, let's go the negative route here. I know it's just area you tend to live in the past. So, like, let's say Juan Soto does not come here. Let's say House
Mm,
Steinbrenner like decides, I'm just gonna match every dollar Steve Cohen throws at him,
mm,
and he's gonna stay. Like, what do the Mets do from there? Do you think? Do they think they go back in the high pitching market? Do they just look for more bats?
I think that's a great question, and I've thought about it, and I know you fed it to me before the podcast. You really just wonder because you kind of look towards next year too, like say Vlad or even Kyle Tucker, players like that don't hit the market, or they do hit the market. Then you could look at like, okay, yeah, maybe they go towards the pitching, they try and load up on the staff, maybe get some lower tier guys, put them in the outfield, try and get creative with it, maybe even take on a Cody Bellinger, put him in center field or something like that. Or, you pivot and go to the Willy Adames route, right? Where you could see that happening. Um, I'm not saying it makes sense and they'll do it. An idea is Pete goes to DH. They pay him, as a designated hitter. You get Adames, you put him at third, and then you move Vientos to first. I think that's a potential option. Outfield, there are not many. Luis Robert, from the Chicago White Sox. We're not really sure what kind of price that they would demand for him, but that's obviously someone who could play the outfield. A talented bat, has had injury issues, amongst other things. I don't think there's that many options out there hitters wise for the Mets to kind of explore, outside of the free agent market. So it's going to be really difficult. And I know Soto's this sort of white whale. I think they're gonna have to bring back Pete at that point, right? Like, where are you sort of replacing that production? Like, if you get Soto in and you lose Alonso, you got one of the best hitters in the game, so it's okay. But if you lose out on Soto, and now Pete's price will probably go up. So you're kind of sitting there saying, what do the Mets do? What can they do? And I think that's a contingency plan that David Stearns has, and the Mets front office has. Uh, Realistically, I think it has to go down that route. You have to look at Adames. You have to look at bringing Pete back, and maybe some other options. Santander, I'm not too sure about. I'm not completely sold on him. I know you're kind of not in that realm either. So yeah, it's kind of difficult where the Mets are at with that. Maybe they do Burns. I'm not completely sold. I just don't think the aces that are left in this free agent market are kind of worth spending, what, 6 years on. Like, I'm not going past 5 years from Max Fried, for example. Corbin Burns, like a digest, maybe 7 years at the most. But for me, I don't see the Mets kind of pushing in that direction for two guys like that. I think it would be, you know, like a Burns, and then you go for a Walker Buehler. I could see that if they miss out on Soto, and then keep Pete and get a little creative with other hitters.
Yeah, let's go to the starting pitching here for a second. I think that's the interesting discussion as well, because we've seen Stearns kind of tip his hand a little bit, say, like the short-term market has value in it. Like they exploited it last year, and I'm sure they gave them confidence, say, oh, we can do this again. We can rehab some guys and get good stuff out of them instead of the pitching lab. And he changed their pitch sequences here. I think that he generally is not a fan of giving long-term deals to starting pitchers because they don't really age very well. And I think the Blake Snell contract the Dodgers gave, even with the money deferred at 5 for 182, I think that may have cemented further in Stearns' mind. You know what? I don't need to go give Corbin Burns 7 years. Like we can develop our own pitching. We'll just keep stopgapping it and develop our options that way.
I think you're right. And also like from the Dodgers perspective, they could take that risk with Blake Snell, right? Like that's something that they could afford to do. As for the Mets, forget about that World Series drought. Just the outlook of the team. Do you really want to like pin down and sign a guy that, has has a high chance of blowing up? Like Max Fried has had serious injury issues. They haven't been that strongly linked to Fried, right? I think the one of the top guys that they've been linked to more often than not has been Corbin Burns. So because of the relationship with David Stearns and all that, but it really seems like he's going to remain in the AL East. I would assume Burns. I mean, he could go to San Francisco. I have a kind of a hard time believing Burns comes and then we don't see like a Max Fried or something like that. I just don't see that. I wouldn't be stunned if Burns comes, but just because of the years, like you're mentioning, like there's just risk there. And there's nothing against like Corbin Burns, but he's not that elite pitcher that I would be comfortable giving 7 years to. Like say like Garrett Cole's on the market. Like sure, when Garrett Cole was a free agent, you're fine with that amount of years, right? So any of these pitchers here, they're really good, not great, potential top 10 Cy Young candidates. But guess what? They signed Sean Manaea and he became that last year. So you're right in saying like, why are we going to spend all that money when one, we could develop those guys. And the Mets have a great history even without David Stearns of doing that. So I think that's the option you can go down. And again, Sean Manaea, as we mentioned, I forgot to bring him up. Like that's another guy that you could bring back. So yeah.
Yeah, Sean and I am coming back certainly an option as well because I think it's thing also that the Angels getting Yusei Kikuchi to 3 year, $63 million deal definitely raised the price in that middle tier of starting pitching. It's like makes you wonder. Especially Joel Sherman seems to be tapped in the Mets like pitching plans. He said that
Mm,
one of the teams there talking to Clay Holmes about converting back to a
yes.
starter. They talked to Mike Soroka potentially about competing for a job in spring training. We know how good he was at Atlanta before he had those injuries. So it makes you wonder like if they throw all their eggs into this short term like rehab guys basket, which is like obviously something that we know we can do, but like I said at the top here, I prefer at least a little bit of stability in terms of innings as opposed to just going, oh, like we can rehab everybody and like fix everybody. I don't think that's the right way to look at it either.
I agree with you, but also if we really look at the market, who do we say that's safe that you could rely upon that isn't Corbin Burns,
Yeah.
right? That's kind of the issue here. And also why I think there's going to be a trade. I think I don't think Crochet is going to happen. I think that price is going to be too steep for the Mets, unless again, like we talk all the time, David Stearns and how he views these Mets prospects are a lot different than the way we and many other, GMs, the 20 GMs they had in the Cohen era before Stearns valued these guys. So does he value Jet the same as Acuna or past guys, right? Like Alex Ramirez, the guy was a top 10 prospect in the Mets farm, went into free agency, ends up signing back. There's just so many different ways. I think Luis Castillo, Jesus Luzardo, again, the dark horse. It would be a high price and the value is sort of low because of recovering from Tommy John, Sandy Alcantara, not completely ruling him out. I think the trade route is the way to go for the Mets because I think they have expendable players in their farm system that David Stearns also is going to have so many resources to replenish.
Yeah, so the trade route's an interesting route to consider here because obviously, like, not only in terms of adding a starter, but I think just because you mentioned they have expendable pieces, and I think this is also another way that's sort of tied into Juan Soto here. Like, where if he shows up, like, are you keeping Starling Marte as DH? Or are you trading him? Are you trading Jeff McNeil somewhere to open up spots for other guys?
Correct.
So I think they have a lot. I think that you're going to start seeing trade rumors, especially like after the Soto thing is resolved one way or the other with the Mets.
Yeah, absolutely. Because realistically, the whole layout for the entire season, let alone an entire decade is is going to be centered around the Soto signing. So obviously, like the Montas signing is irrelevant to what happened with Soto. Like they were going to need pitching if he was coming or going. And the same goes for like the trade market. Like as you're mentioning, if the Mets get Juan Soto, that's right field for like 15 years, right? So when you have that, then that makes what? Starling Marte expendable. And also, like, as you bring up Jeff McNeil, McNeil kind of revived his stock towards the end of the season because he started making better contact and he was going back to what made him so great for all those years. Starling Marte has 1 year left on his deal. When healthy, which is not going to happen anymore because he's in his mid to late 30s. So you could throw that out the window. When healthy, can be productive, can be a useful player for a Major League Baseball team, whether you're in contention or just, trying to plug in a guy to keep fans to shut up, Marlins. I think there is obviously that window where the Mets are going to have to eat some dollars for players like that and, get something in return that might be useful for them. Obviously, the Mariners are one of those options. I think the Marlins, obviously, as well. And hey, maybe there's some other teams out there that would be willing to take on Starling Marte as a player that maybe have some expendable pitching. So we'll see. I think there is a chance for that. And McNeil or Acuna, Jet Williams, perhaps Colin Houck as well. Some of these low A guys that they signed or drafted at the top of the draft that, maybe not don't have a fit in New York. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Stearns values these guys.
Yeah, that's for sure. A couple of things I want to touch on here in the think tank here. Number one, first base of Pete Alonso, obviously, and they have this whole situation lined up basically where like they let him test the market. We've heard nothing on Pete's market aside from Scott Boris's jokes about the polar bear being in a bear market. So I think it's not being a bear market is the polar opposite of all of his stupid dad jokes. But I think obviously there is still a chance, especially if Soto comes, that the Mets just say, okay, here's our walkway number, Pete. If you don't want this, feel free to go look somewhere else and you can find the number you want. So, like, what do you think the outlook is for the Mets at first base? Is it Pete? Is it moving Mark Vientos across the diamond and bringing a third baseman in? Is it Christian Walker or Rizzo or Goldschmidt? Like, what do you think they do at first base?
I don't think Rizzo comes. I don't think that's like an option at all. I think there's like way too many things that signify that he is just not even a starting baseman, to be honest with you. And especially for a team that has aspirations for the playoffs. The Yankees had to do it because he was on their payroll. They had no realistic other options. Christian Walker would be great if Pete were to walk. Again, 3 to 4 year deal max, maybe an opt out for year four. Doubt him getting anything beyond 4 years. Goldschmidt, again, I wouldn't hate Goldie, but again, that's a short-term fix. Maybe just Goldie is a stopgap for Vladdy if that were to happen. I think you have to draw a line in the sand with Pete. You also kind of sit there and say, what team would love to get Pete and is willing to pay the number that the Mets wouldn't? And that kind of puts you in a very small window, right? Like he rejected Matt Olson money, right? So like 158. If he wants more than that, you're kind of looking at who could afford that, who's willing to do it, and could use him. What are the options here, Mike? You got a couple teams out west, the Angels. If Moreno goes a little silly again because he paid up pretty big for Kikuchi.
Seattle, maybe.
See, Seattle, maybe. I don't personally see that. San Francisco, you could also, and again, maybe there's a shift in, philosophy with Buster Posey in the front office. I mean, Philly makes zero sense if you were to stay on the East Coast. I know there was rumors of the Cubs, but the Cubs are looking to dump Bellinger. I, what, I don't know. I don't think there's that many options for Pete. I think whatever contract he gets will be relatively big for him. I think he's going to get paid a handsome amount of money, regardless if we think that's going to work or not. But I truthfully believe that the best place for Pete Alonso is New York. I think being a New York man, I wouldn't even completely rule out the Yankees if they were to lose Soto. I think the Yankees could go for Alonso and try and be a aha, gotcha. I don't know if Pete would kind of fit the mold of a Yankee. I think his personality and what he's about is a little different. Um, but yeah, I don't know. To me, the Mets should draw a line in the sand. And maybe the moment got to us a little bit during the playoffs where we're like, oh yeah, there's no way he's leaving now.
Yeah.
Maybe that is the case, but again, he's a Boris client, right? Like you can't ever say, oh, there's no doubt that this guy is staying or leaving. So for me, I'm kind of with, all right, Pete, maybe a little bit more money because of whatever you want this X amount of dollars because you want to be surpassing this player or whatever. Just because it's like getting a job title, but like the pay increase isn't that great, right? You just want the
Yeah.
title. You just want that recognition, I guess. Um, I'm kind of like on the 45% Pete returns. I think realistically, with the way Scott has been able to get his clients money so far, I think Pete is going to be in that. Because again, as well, like Mike, if I'm assuming the Mets get Soto and they exceed 700 million, yeah, man,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
gonna ask for a lot.
Yeah, I think there's two things I think to keep an eye on here with the Pete thing is obviously the Yankees you mentioned that if Soto does come here. I could see them saying, okay, we need right-handed power to protect Judge in the lineup. Here's Pete to do that. The other angle I think you're not looking at enough is like the team that's like on the fringe of contention that like wants to make a splash for their fans and says, okay, like we got a star in here. Overpaid him, but he's here.
Washington?
Washington's one I had in mind, and I mentioned this to Charlie Borges, who lives in Pittsburgh now a few weeks ago. Like, if the Pirates ever decide to spend money, like, he'd be the kind of guy I can see them spending it on.
Yeah, but I mean, I just like they just cut a guy because they didn't want to pay his bonus. I totally get where you're coming from. I just think they suck. They're
Yeah,
like the worst organization on the East Coast next to the Marlins. I think they're a disgusting example of where Major League Baseball is in terms of ownership and paying up. Um, Washington, totally see where you're coming from with that. That's been kind of floated. We know Boris has a great relationship with Lerner, Rizzo. Maybe not so great after the Soto stuff, but the Soto stuff is completely different, right? So I agree with you. I think you can see the Nationals. I think the Nationals are probably the best dark horse. I think you're right with that. Is good call.
yeah, because the Washington situation I see is like I've heard them linked to Santander as well, where it feels like right before they had the big window where they were contending every year, they went and overpaid Jason Worth. I think like it's
Mm,
a similar situation where, like we give him a lot of money, but he's here to help support the young guys.
yeah, exactly. And I think, but that's the weird thing with Washington. I still think at least 2 years away from really being like a competitor like that. We have to see how the rest of their guys develop, but they really got some ballers on there. I think they've shown some positive signs, some negatives. I think free agency has been rough on them. Um, but yeah, the way Pete would age with them is just kind of not great. Sort of like that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle meme when they're young and they're with their guy and then he's just older. I don't know his name. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Pete, for me, I think is obviously going to take top dollar. As far as that goes, I don't know. I think the Mets, they don't have to get it done. I think they actually hold leverage in the Pete
Yeah.
side of negotiations,
Especially if Pete wants to be here.
which I'm sure he does. He doesn't. Not to say he's not well PR trained, but the way his comments were after the fact, as opposed to Soto's, are a lot more damning. I would say I would say like there is a deep part of like Pete really wants to come back to the Mets. There's a different relationship and dynamic for who Pete is when he came up, what he's accomplished, as opposed to, like sort of had a great year in New York for the Yankees and but he still like didn't give a shit and rejected the Nationals when they offered him a mega deal at the time.
Yeah. That is the thing you're sort of keeping an eye on here with that. Another thing keep an eye on with the Mets is also like quickly on the bullpen because we know this is the David Stearns specialty where like he does not like to go bid on multi-year guys, so don't expect a Tanner Scott here. I think the bullpen, you're waiting until about mid-January before you see like the market kind of depress a little bit. Says, okay, who wants a 1 year deal with a decent salary? And somebody will jump on it. I feel like other than that, they keep accumulating these minor league guys is or get themselves options they can fix.
I agree with you. I think there's 32 of the 40 man filled out right now are signed. So I think a lot of that is going to be with or not a lot, just a good amount is going to be with relief pitching. Williams, a name floated. I don't see how the Mets do that because I still am of the belief that they're going to go towards starting pitching. So I don't think they're going to have enough to trade for both. Um, Again, it could be one or the other. I think Devin Williams is sort of like that would be a surprise great move. I agree with you on Tanner Scott. And again, with the Chapman number being at 10 million, like who are you going to pay, right? Like, so I think you mentioned Stanek is one guy that they could potentially bring back. The other name was, oh my gosh, who is it that
Uh,
they let go?
Phil
That's a free agent.
Maton, they
Yeah,
climbed.
Maton. And Maton was a little, not everybody trusted him towards the end, but I do think there was enough like metrics there that they would be fine with bringing him back as well. I don't think there's anything crazy that the Mets will do in the market. I think they're going to go high upside with the bullpen and try and fix their guys.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense here. Last thing here in terms of the think tank. We obviously have the Mets had a lot of colorful characters in terms of guys who made contributions last year, whether is like Jesse Winker coming in, becoming a fan favorite down the stretch. The guys they got from the bullpen. You obviously Mania, Severino, Jose Quintana, rotation options, Jose
Mm.
Iglesias, like how many of these guys think could possibly come back? Because obviously, like I think Stearns wants to be factoring in chemistry as well, and like this group had a lot of it. And we heard that one of the reasons the bonuses that they mentioned on SNY about the whole Frankie Montas thing, he brings some of the clubhouse vibes that Mania did in case they don't get Mania back.
I mean, I think culture matters. Locker rooms matter. You see the Dodgers have a lot of personality. We know how the Yankees like to be clean cut, like don't can only have a mustache type stuff. It's a little different, but they do have personality there. I think Boone's a cool guy. He's laid back. It's not like what they're perceived, right? I think it matters. Because we kind of saw that camaraderie, and morale adds to stuff. Again, that's post Lopez throwing the glove into the stands, but again, I think that matters. Because again, you want guys who want to be here, right? I think a lot in the past, guys were reluctant to come to the New York Mets for many reasons, and there wasn't enough dollars to make them do that. Yeah, I think getting guys like Montes it matters, and obviously like Pete. So yeah, I don't know all these guys personality wise. I can't say that, but I think that is the angle where they're going towards. Because again, baseball is a culture thing. 162 games. Games are 2.5 hours per game. 162 of them, 81 on the road, 81 at home. Spring training, like there's so much. Everybody's around each other so much, different from many other sports, I would say. So yeah, you need guys that you want to have in that locker room.
Yeah. I think the one I'm keeping an eye on is Jose Iglesias because I feel like he's like still like working out in mech gear in the off season. He's very feels like inspired that he save his career here. I think he would come back if they can take him. I think right now the question is, do they have the room for him on the roster? Which I don't know if they do based on the current construction.
Yeah, I think that exactly. And I think that's just going to take some time, like we were saying, on what happens with Soto, what happens with all these other middle infielders. Like the Mets just have so many. And, you don't want to block the development of a Luis Angel Acuna, even Jet Williams, because, he had a bit of a lost year because of his injury issues with his wrist. So, his development might take a little bit more. Who knows when we'll see him? I would assume post All-Star break, unless he absolutely rakes and has proved he's healthy at a higher level in the minor leagues. Winker, just to circle back on him real quick. Listen, Jesse has the potential to, be a starting player at certain ball clubs in Major League Baseball. Going back to Cincinnati would be an option for him. Totally would get it. I think Stearns left the door open for him as well. Listen, I think Winker would be great to have return, but obviously when you get a guy like Jose Siri, kind of obviously he's a center fielder, so he won't. That's more of the beta replacement. But again, with Winker, we don't know what happens with Starling Marte. We don't know what happens with Juan Soto. So I think that's really contingent upon and who's going to be on the roster. Again, I could see another team that is not desperate for a hitter, but highly needs a guy like Winker more than the Mets do. So I wouldn't be shocked if he's gone before the Mets even have a chance to kind of really negotiate with him.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's really interesting off season for the Mets, Martina. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. People want to follow you on social media. How can I do that?
Yeah, they can just follow me at Martino Puccio on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Again, on TikTok, subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's predominantly soccer. And again, on Instagram at Martino_Puccio. That Milan podcast, where we do a lot of talk about soccer and all that kind of stuff. But obviously, um, the team I care about more than anyone is the New York Mets. So, yeah, some Mets content on there during the season and not much Jets stuff. So, if anything, it's complaining most of the time and betting against them. So, yeah,